Harold Vane didn't bother to knock. He walked straight through Mercy Whitaker's gate like he already owned the place, because in his mind, he already did. He planted himself in the middle of her dead wheat field, looked around at the frost-killed crops with a slow, satisfied smile, and then pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and held it out to her. "Sign it today," he said. "I'll give you $40 for the whole parcel. That's generous, Mercy. More than this dirt deserves." She didn't take the paper. He dropped it on the frozen ground at her feet. "Your husband left you a losing hand," Vane said. "Don't be too proud to fold." If this story already has you gripping your chair, you're in the right place. Subscribe to our channel right now so you never miss a story like this one. Hit that like button and drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get back to Mercy Whitaker and the stranger who was about to change everything. The paper sat on the ground between them, corners lifting in the cold wind, and Mercy Whitaker did not pick it up. She stood with her arms crossed over her chest, her wool coat too thin for the bite in the air. Her boots cracked along the left sole where she'd repaired them herself twice already. She was 44 years old and she looked every year of it, the kind of woman who had stopped pretending things were easier than they were. Her hair was dark with threads of gray she didn't bother hiding. Her hands were rough, her jaw was set. Harold Vane waited. He was a patient man when he wanted something. He had learned that waiting cost him nothing and often cost the other person everything. "Tom's been gone 3 years, he said, his voice taking on something that almost resembled sympathy. 3 years you've been fighting this land by yourself. What have you got to show for it?" Mercy looked at the field. She didn't answer right away because she was deciding something. Not about Vane, but about herself, about how much she would let him see. "I've got the land," she said finally. Vane let out a short breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "Land that grows nothing. It grew wheat." "Past tense," he said. "First frost took the last of it. I saw that from the road." He glanced toward the barn at the far end of the property, the sagging structure with 2 boards missing from the east wall, the roof bowing in the middle from last winter's weight. "That barn's one good snow from collapsing, and when it goes, it'll take what little livestock you have left with it." He wasn't wrong. She knew he wasn't wrong. That was the worst part of standing there. That every word out of Harold Vane's mouth was accurate, and he was using accuracy like a weapon. $40, he said again, "and I'll let you stay in the house through spring." "Reasonable terms, Mercy. I'm not selling." The warmth drained out of his expression. What was underneath wasn't anger exactly, it was something colder. The look of a man who had already decided on the outcome and was simply tired of the delay. "You'll change your mind," he said. He turned and walked back through the gate without closing it. His horse was tied at the fence post and he mounted without hurrying, the way a man mounts when he has nowhere urgent to be because everything is already going according to his plan. He rode back toward town without looking back. Mercy stood in her dead field for a long moment after he was gone. The wind moved across the frost-blackened wheat stubble and made a dry, whispering sound that she had stopped finding peaceful years ago. Now it just sounded like loss. She bent down and picked up his paper. She didn't read it. She folded it smaller than it already was and put it in her coat pocket, and she went back inside. The farmhouse was cold. She'd let the fire burn low to save wood, and the kitchen had that particular morning chill that settles into old houses, the kind that gets into the floor and the walls and takes half the day to push back out. She built the fire up again, filled the kettle, and stood at the window watching the barn the way you watch something you're afraid of losing. Tom had built that barn himself mostly. He'd had help from neighbors for the frame raising, but the detail work, the joints, the stall doors, the loft ladder, that was all Tom. He'd been proud of it. She remembered the way he'd stood in the doorway the week it was finished, hands on his hips, looking at what he'd made. 3 years since the fever took him in January. It felt longer. It also, in certain moments, felt like last week. The kettle began to steam and she turned away from the window. She was going to have to figure something out. That was the plain fact of it. The wheat was gone. She had 4 chickens, 2 goats, and an old plow horse named Fletcher, who had developed a limp over the summer. She had a root cellar with enough stored food to get her through the winter if she was careful. But careful wasn't going to save the farm. It was just going to postpone the losing of it. She poured her tea and sat down at the kitchen table with Vane's folded paper in front of her. She still didn't open it. $40 for everything Tom had built. For the house and the land and the barn and the well and the life they had made here. $40. She left the paper on the table and went outside to feed the chickens. It was while she was scattering grain from the pan that she heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like a disturbance at the edge of her attention. She looked up toward the gate. There was a man standing at her fence. He was holding the gate latch but hadn't opened it yet, which she noticed and appreciated more than she expected to. He was lean in the way of a man who'd been missing meals, not in the way of a man who'd chosen it. His coat was heavy enough but worn through at both elbows. He had a hat pulled low against the wind, and standing just behind him on either side, half sheltered by his body, were two children, a boy and a girl. The boy looked to be around 9 or 10, the girl maybe 6 or 7. Both of them had that particular stillness that children get when they've been walking long enough that being still feels like the only luxury left. Mercy stood with the grain pan against her hip and looked at them. The man spoke first. "I'm not asking for charity," he said. His voice was steady but careful, the way a man speaks when he's practiced the words a few times before saying them. "I have a proposition." "All right," Mercy said. She didn't move toward him, but she didn't move away either. "My name is Elias Rowan. I'm a barn builder by trade. I can see yours needs work." He nodded toward the structure at the far end of the yard. "I'll rebuild it for you. Proper work, not patch jobs. New support beams where they're needed, replace the damaged siding, shore up the roof. It'll stand another 40 years when I'm done." "And in return?" Mercy asked. He glanced down at the girl who had moved slightly closer to his leg without seeming to notice she'd done it. "Feed my children," he said. "Through the winter, just meals and shelter. I'll sleep in the barn. I'm not asking for a room, just for them." Mercy looked at the two children. The boy was watching her with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and wasn't quite managing it. The girl wasn't looking at her at all. She was looking at the chickens with an expression of complete exhaustion that somehow also contained a small thread of interest. "What happened to your farm?" Mercy asked. "Drought took the crops in August," Elias said. "Lost the well in September. It went dry and wouldn't recover. Spent what we had trying to save it. When it was clear there was nothing left to save, we started moving." "Where from?" "East of Delaware County, about 60 miles. 60 miles. She looked at the children again. 60 miles in this cold with not enough food. She could see it in both of them. The boy's cheekbones were too sharp. The girl's lips were chapped and cracked. "You walked 60 miles?" Mercy said. "Most of it," Elias said, without elaboration. She looked at the barn. It was bad. She knew it was bad, but she wasn't sure it was worth what he was offering. A man and 2 children through the winter was a significant cost. Food was already a calculation she was making every day. She also wasn't sure it mattered, because she was already thinking about what she was going to feed them for dinner. "There's a room in the back of the house," she said. "The children can sleep there. It has a small stove. You," she looked at him, "can have the barn loft while you're working on it." "You don't need to. The ground freezes hard here," she said. "A man sleeping in a barn loft in December in this valley will lose fingers. I'm not going to be responsible for that. The house has a back room." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face that she didn't try to name. "All right," he said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Mercy said. "I haven't fed you anything." She pushed the gate open herself and walked back toward the house. After a moment, she heard the gate latch click behind her and the sound of boots on frozen ground. 3 sets, 1 adult, 2 children, the children's lighter steps slightly uneven from tiredness. She didn't look back. She went inside and started on supper. His name was Elias Rowan, and he had, she discovered over the next few days, a quality she hadn't expected. He was honest about what he didn't know. The first morning, he walked the barn's perimeter for nearly 2 hours before he touched anything. She watched him from the kitchen window while the children ate. She'd made oatmeal with the last of the dried apple slices, and the boy, Caleb, ate with the focused intensity of someone who had learned not to leave anything in the bowl. The girl, Rose, ate more slowly, pausing sometimes to look around the kitchen as if she was still deciding whether it was safe to relax. When Elias came back inside, he sat down at the table and Mercy set a bowl in front of him, and he said, "The east wall is worse than it looks from outside. The 2 main support posts on that side have rot in the base. They'll need to come out completely and be replaced, not shored up." "All right," Mercy said. "That means I'll need timber, the right kind. Is there a mill in town?" "Hargrove's Mill, north end of Main Street." He nodded slowly. "I don't have money for materials." "I know," she said. "I'll go with you. Bill Hargrove and I have an arrangement from when Tom was alive. He lets me run credit against the harvest." "What harvest?" Elias asked, and then caught himself. "I'm sorry, that was a rude question." It was an accurate question, Mercy said. Same as what Harold Vane said to me yesterday. Doesn't stop being accurate because it's rude. He was quiet for a moment. Who's Harold Vane? Man who wants my land. He came by yesterday to make another offer. She picked up her tea. He's been making offers for 2 years. Each time he comes, something's gotten worse on the property. Last spring, it was the well that needed repair. Before that, it was the fence line along the north pasture. Elias looked at her. You think he's got something to do with those problems? I think it's a coincidence that keeps recurring, Mercy said. And I've lived long enough to be suspicious of coincidences that benefit the same person every time. Caleb looked up from his empty bowl. Pa says coincidences are just patterns people aren't looking at right. Both adults looked at him. He seemed to realize he'd spoken aloud and went back to looking at his bowl. Your pa's not wrong, Mercy said. The trip to Hargrove's mill happened 2 days later. Mercy drove the wagon with Fletcher, who was not happy about the cold, and expressed this through a series of increasingly irritated ear positions. Elias sat beside her, and the children rode in the back, bundled in every spare blanket Mercy could find. The town of Callow Creek was small enough that everyone knew everyone and large enough that people felt entitled to opinions about their neighbors. She felt the looks as the wagon came down Main Street. A few people she'd known for years, watching from doorways and storefronts with expressions that mixed curiosity with something that wasn't quite disapproval but was working toward it. Clara Dietz, who ran the dry goods store with her husband, stepped out onto the boardwalk as Mercy drove past. Mercy Whitaker, she called, not meanly but not warmly either. I heard you had guests. I do, Mercy said, and kept driving. At the mill, Bill Hargrove was more direct. He was a big man with a direct manner and not much patience for anything he considered foolish, which covered a wide territory. He came out of the mill office when he heard the wagon and took in Mercy and Elias and the children in one comprehensive look. Who's this? He asked Mercy. Elias Rowan. He's rebuilding my barn. In exchange for what? That's between him and me, Bill. Hargrove shifted his weight. He and Mercy had known each other for 15 years, and he'd respected Tom Whitaker, and he'd been decent to her since... But decent had limits, and she could see him locating those limits in real time. Mercy, he said. Lower. People are going to talk. People are already talking, she said. They've been talking for 3 years. It hasn't changed my situation yet. Now, are you going to sell me the lumber or not? He sold her the lumber. On the drive back, Elias said, I'm sorry if I made things harder for you. You didn't make anything harder, Mercy said. Harold Vane's made things harder. The drought made things harder. Tom dying made things harder. You haven't done anything except offer to rebuild my barn. People don't see it that way. People don't see a lot of things the way they are, she said. That's their problem. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, you're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone more... He seemed to search for the word. More cautious. I'm extremely cautious, Mercy said. I just don't let it stop me from doing necessary things. Rose's small voice came from the back of the wagon. Is this town where we live now? Mercy and Elias both turned slightly. The girl was looking at the fading view of Callow Creek as the wagon moved away from it, her expression unreadable. For now, Elias said carefully. Oh, Rose said and turned back around. The word landed strangely. The particular weight of a child trying not to want something too much. Mercy kept her eyes on the road. Elias started on the barn the next morning before the sun was fully up. She heard him through the kitchen wall, the sounds of boards being tested, the creak of things being moved and examined. When she brought him coffee at 7, he was already inside the structure with a lantern, crouched down near the east wall's base, pressing his thumb into the wood and frowning. Worse than I thought, he said, taking the coffee without looking up. The ROTS traveled up into the secondary supports. I'll need to take down the whole E section and rebuild it from the base. How long will that take? A week for that section alone if the weather holds. He straightened up and looked at the roof. The center beam is bowed, not broken, but bowed. I can straighten it, but it'll take another support underneath while I do it. Do you know how to do that? He looked at her. It wasn't an offended look, more like a look that was deciding how honest to be. I've done it once before, he said. Helped a man in Dellard on a similar problem. I watched more than I helped, but I know the principle. That's an honest answer, Mercy said. I try to be, he said. He looked back at the beam. I'll figure it out. That's also honest. She went back inside. Caleb came to find her an hour later, standing in the kitchen doorway with a look on his face that suggested he'd been standing there for a while before he spoke. Can I help? He asked. With something. Whatever you need. Mercy looked at him. He was 10, she'd determined, Tom's age in one of the photographs she had from Tom's childhood, the same narrow shoulders and serious eyes. It gave her a feeling she didn't examine too closely. "Can you split wood?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Come on, then." They worked outside for 2 hours, Mercy showing him the technique with the maul. Not because he didn't know it, but because he'd been doing it slightly wrong, and she could see it in his shoulders, the inefficiency. He listened without complaining, adjusted his grip the way she showed him, and by the second hour, he'd found his rhythm. He didn't talk much. She didn't either, but the silence between them was comfortable in the particular way that comes from working alongside someone. The kind of quiet that means you're both paying attention to the same thing. Rose appeared at the woodpile around mid-morning, wrapped in a blanket over her coat, carrying something in her arms. She presented it to Mercy without ceremony, a tin plate with 4 biscuits on it, somewhat irregularly shaped but clearly and carefully made. "I found the flour," Rose said, "and the lard. I watched my mom make them before she stopped. I made them myself." Mercy took the plate. The biscuits were dense, but the smell was right. "How long did you bake them?" "Until they looked done," Rose said. "I wasn't sure exactly. That's usually how it goes," Mercy said, and took one and bit into it. It was a little heavy, but the flavor was good. "These are fine biscuits." Rose's expression did a complicated thing, relief and pride and something guarded all at once. "Ma used to add a little sugar," she said, "but I didn't want to use yours without asking." "The sugar's in the tin on the second shelf," Mercy said. "You can use what you need." Rose nodded and went back inside. Caleb watched her go, then turned back to the woodpile and picked up the maul again. "She misses our mother," he said, in the flat tone of someone stating a fact that is too large to be said with feeling. "I know," Mercy said. "When did she pass?" "Last spring. Fever." He set a log on the block. "Same as your husband," Pa said. "Pa told us about your farm when he heard about the field dying. He said maybe there was something we could do to help." Mercy stood with her own maul and looked at him. "Your father heard about my farm and came here on purpose?" Caleb glanced at her, suddenly uncertain. "Was that wrong?" She thought about it. "No," she said. "No, that wasn't wrong." That evening, when the children were asleep, Mercy sat across the kitchen table from Elias with the lamp between them and said, "Caleb told me you sought out my farm specifically." Elias looked up from the piece of leather he was mending, a strap from the harness that had cracked. He set it down. "I heard about the place from a man on the road," he said, "a farmer moving south. He said there was a widow in Callow Creek with a barn that needed major work and a field that had failed. He meant it as, I don't know, just information. But I thought," he stopped, "I had nothing to offer except what I know how to do. Seemed worth trying. You walked 60 miles to find a barn to rebuild. I walked 60 miles to find something my children and I could trade for," he said. "There's a difference." She considered that. "You could have found work in a town." "Day labor," he said. "Not enough, not stable, and I'd be putting them somewhere while I worked and He stopped again. He had a way of catching himself that she was starting to recognize, not deception, but carefulness. A man who thought before he spoke and sometimes changed direction mid-sentence when he realized he was about to say more than he meant to. "You didn't want to leave them somewhere," Mercy said. "No," he said simply. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had picked up again, the particular long moan of it that meant a front was moving through. "The east wall is going to be the main work," he said, picking up the harness strap again. "After that, the roof will be faster. The middle beam is the critical piece. If I can stabilize that without taking the whole roof off..." "Elias," he stopped. "That's not what I was asking about," she said. He looked at her. In the lamplight, he had the look of a man who was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. The particular exhaustion of someone who'd been holding everything together by will alone for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like not to be doing that. "I know," he said. "What happened to your wife?" she asked. Not to pry. She'd been careful about that. But they were sitting at her table in her kitchen, and his children were sleeping in her back room, and she thought they'd both been polite long enough. "Fever, like Caleb said," Elias said. "March, the same week the well started failing." He was quiet for a moment. "I thought if I could just save the farm, it would..." "I don't know what I thought. That something would balance out. That if I saved the farm, the other thing wouldn't have happened for nothing." He rubbed the side of his face. "That's not how it works." "No," Mercy agreed. "It isn't." They sat with that for a moment. "Tom died 3 years ago," she said. "January. Same kind of a winter as this one. She looked at her hands on the table. He coughed for 2 weeks before it was clear it was serious. By the time I got the doctor here, it was already decided, I think. The doctor wasn't sure. He said it could have gone either way, and it just went the wrong way. I'm sorry, Elias said. So am I, she said. Every day I still am. She picked up her tea. But I kept the land. Tom wanted me to keep it. Some people thought I should sell up and go live with my sister in the valley, and some days I thought they were right, but she shook her head. It would have felt like losing him twice. Elias looked at her for a long moment. Vane's been offering to buy it. 2 years of offers, she said, and each time something new goes wrong on the property. Yes. He was quiet. Then, the fence along the north pasture. You said it needed repair. Spring before last. I'll look at it when I've got the barn sorted, he said. Fence damage has a pattern depending on what caused it. Weather damage looks different from other kinds. She set down her tea. You think someone's been interfering with my property? I think it's worth knowing, he said, and it's easier to see with fresh eyes. She looked at him across the table. The lamplight was steady between them, and outside the wind continued its long complaint, and in the back of the house the children slept, and something in the room felt different than it had an hour ago. Not resolved, not settled, but different. Like a door that had been stuck had moved slightly on its hinges. She wasn't sure what to do with that, so she didn't do anything yet. Get some sleep, she said. The east wall isn't going anywhere tonight. He almost smiled. Not quite, just a shift at the corner of his mouth. Yes, ma'am, he said, the same way Caleb had said it, and she felt the echo of it somewhere in her chest. She went to bed. She lay in the dark for a long time, listening to the wind. She was not, she told herself, going to make too much of any of this. 2 children and a man she'd known for less than a week, none of whom had anywhere else to go, none of whom had asked for anything except the chance to earn what they needed. That was the whole of it. But the house felt different with them in it. There was no other word for it. It felt inhabited in a way it hadn't in 3 years, and she wasn't sure whether that was a comfort or a warning. In the morning, she got up and made breakfast for all of them, and Elias went back to the barn, and Caleb came back to help split wood without being asked, and Rose stood at the kitchen counter and watched Mercy with careful, serious eyes while she mixed the morning batter, and everything continued. The work was steady, and the cold was real, and Harold Vane's folded paper was still sitting on the kitchen table, and none of them knew yet what was buried under the barn floor. 3 days into the work, Elias pulled up a section of the barn floor and found something that shouldn't have been there. He almost didn't. He'd been focused on the east wall. Had the 2 rotted support posts out by the second day and was fitting the replacement timber when he noticed the floor planks near the base of the old posts were different from the rest. Not in color, not obviously, but in the sound they made when he walked across them. A hollow resonance, faint but distinct, the kind of sound that a solid floor doesn't make. He stopped, crouched down, pressed his palm flat against the plank and rapped it with his knuckle. Hollow. Definitely hollow. He got the pry bar and worked carefully, not wanting to split the wood if it could be helped. The nails were old, square-headed, hand-forged, the kind that hadn't been common in 30 years. Whatever was underneath had been down there for a long time. The plank came up in one piece. Beneath it was a trapdoor set flush into a timber frame with an iron ring handle dark with age. Elias stared at it for a moment, then stood up and walked out of the barn. Mercy was at the woodpile stacking what Caleb had split that morning. She heard him coming and turned. "You need to come look at something," he said. His voice was level, but there was something in it that made her set down the log she was holding without question. The trapdoor was about 3 feet by 4. The frame fitted so precisely into the floor that it was nearly invisible once the plank was back in place. Which explained why she'd never seen it, and why Tom, apparently, had never seen it either. Or, if he hadn't mentioned it. She stood, looking at the iron ring, and tried to remember whether Tom had ever said anything about a cellar under the barn. He hadn't. She was certain. "How old is that hardware?" she asked. "The nails I pulled were hand-forged," Elias said. 30 years, maybe 40. Could be older. She reached down and took the iron ring. It moved more easily than it should have, given the age. Someone had greased the hinges at some point, though not recently. The trapdoor swung up and back on a counterweighted hinge, the kind of engineering that took planning. Below was darkness and the smell of cold earth and something else. A dry, preserved smell, like old wood and something herbal she couldn't name. Elias had a lantern going in under a minute. He went down first, the ladder solid under his weight. And that was another thing she noticed. The ladder rungs were hardwood, fitted properly, not just nailed boards. Someone had built this with care and intention. She went down after him. The space was bigger than she'd expected. Not enormous. Maybe 12 feet across and 20 long, with the ceiling just above Elias's head. The earthen walls had been lined with flat stone to keep them from collapsing, mortared in place with what looked like lime. The floor was tamped earth, dry and hard. Along both long walls, wooden shelves ran from floor to ceiling, and on the shelves were crates. Wooden crates fitted with lids, some sealed with strips of oilskin wrapped and tied. Maybe 30 of them, varying sizes. Elias held the lantern up and moved along the left wall, reading the sides of the crates. Someone had written on them, in careful block letters, still legible despite the years. Winter wheat, dried. Field corn, seed stock. Rye, oats, buckwheat. Several crates marked tools, dry packed. Others labeled lamp oil, sealed, salt, 40 medicinal, herbs, dried. Mercy stood in the center of the space and turned in a slow circle. Her heart was doing something she didn't have an immediate word for. Not excitement, not quite. More like the feeling of a floor that you expected to be hollow, turning out to be solid. Someone built this deliberately, Elias said. He was crouching in front of one of the larger crates, working at the oilskin wrapping. Look at the stonework. This took months. Who? Mercy said. We bought this land from the Garrett family 8 years ago. Tom looked at the property records going back. He was thorough about that. Before the Garretts, it was a man named Abner Foss. He homesteaded the original claim in, she tried to remember, 1831, I think. Something like that. That would fit, Elias said. He got the oilskin loose and lifted the crate lid. Inside, packed in layers of dry straw, were glass seed jars sealed with wax. He lifted one and held it to the lantern. The seeds inside, small, dark, carefully sorted, looked improbably intact. These have been stored right, cold and dry and sealed from air. Seeds can last a long time if they're stored right. Are they still viable? I don't know. Some seeds hold longer than others. Wheat and corn, I've heard of viable seed after 20 years in the right conditions. Whether these are the right conditions, he set the jar down carefully. You'd have to test them. Plant a small batch, see what comes up. Mercy moved to the right wall and worked at the nearest crate lid herself. It was the one marked tools, dry packed. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were hand tools, a draw knife, several chisels of different sizes, a wooden-handled auger, a small saw with the blade coated in something dark. Grease, she thought, to prevent rust. She unwrapped the saw partially and looked at the blade. Surface rust only, barely a patina. She pulled the cloth back, and underneath was an envelope sealed with wax, sitting flat against the bottom of the crate. She picked it up and looked at it. On the front, in the same careful block letters as the crate labels, for whoever finds this. She held it for a moment without opening it. Elias, she said. He came across and looked at the envelope in her hands. Then he looked at her face. Go ahead, he said quietly. The wax seal cracked cleanly. Inside was a single folded sheet, the paper yellowed but not brittle. The handwriting was different from the block letters on the crates. This was a flowing hand, practiced and deliberate, the kind of penmanship taught in a certain era. She read it aloud because it felt wrong to read it silently alone. If you have found this place, then you are someone who needed to find it. That is the only way it makes sense. That things arrive when the need for them is real. I am Abner Foss, and I built this farm in the valley below Callow Creek in the year 1831, when my wife and I came west with $40 and a mule and a conviction that hard land was better than no land. I have seen droughts. I have seen winters that killed everything. I have watched neighbors lose what they spent their lives building because there was nothing put aside when the bad years came. I decided I would not be that story, and neither would whoever came after me on this ground. What is stored here was gathered over 20 years. Seed stock from good harvest, tools chosen and maintained, supplies laid in during the years of abundance. It is not charity. It is not a gift from me to you, because I do not know you, and gifts require knowing. It is something else. It is what a man does when he believes that the future is worth preparing for, even when he cannot see it. Use what you need. Share what you can. The land will give back what you put into it, if you are patient and honest and willing to work when working is the only answer. The cellar will hold. I built it to hold. Abner Foss, 1851. Mercy finished reading and folded the letter carefully along its original creases. The space was very quiet. The lantern threw their shadows long against the stone walls. 20 years, Elias said. He spent 20 years building this. For someone he'd never meet, Mercy said. She didn't say anything else for a moment. She was thinking about Tom, who had owned this land for 11 years and never found this. She was thinking about the morning she'd stood in the dead field with Vane's paper at her feet, believing that everything was simply failing, that failure was the only available story. And she was thinking about a man named Abner Foss who had decided in 1831 that the future deserved more faith than that. She put the letter in her coat pocket next to Vane's folded paper, and the two pieces of paper sat together in that pocket for the rest of the day, which felt like something. They were up there for another hour, cataloging what was there. It was more than she'd initially taken in. Beyond the seed crates and the tools, there were 2 crates of preserved foodstuffs, dried beans, hardtack, dried salt pork wrapped in layers of cloth and oilskin, a sealed tin of rendered fat, a crate of lamp wicks and 2 bladders of lamp oil, the oil still liquid, still usable. The medicinal crate held bundled dried herbs, each bundle labeled in the same hand. Willow bark, yarrow, dried ginger root, peppermint, several she didn't recognize. A small crate in the corner held books, 3 of them, wrapped in multiple layers of oilcloth tied with cord, a farmer's almanac from 1848, a volume on crop rotation she'd never heard of, and a handwritten journal, unlabeled, in the same flowing hand as the letter. She didn't open the journal yet. That felt like something that required sitting down. When they came back up into the barn, Caleb was standing in the doorway with Rose behind him, both of them looking at the open trapdoor with wide eyes. "What's down there?" Caleb asked. "Something someone left behind," Mercy said. "A long time ago." She looked at Elias. "Help me get the plank back in place. We'll cover it for now." He understood without her explaining, the instinct to keep this quiet until she'd decided what to do with it. He fitted the plank back, tamping it down over the trapdoor, and when it was done, the floor looked like it always had. That night, after supper, after the children were in bed, Mercy sat at the kitchen table with the lamp and Abner Foss's journal and read for 2 hours. Elias worked on the harness repair across from her, not asking, giving her the silence. But at some point, she wasn't sure exactly when, she started reading passages aloud, not all of them, but the ones that seemed to need saying. March 4th, 1839. Lost the Northfield to late frost. 3rd year in 4 that the Northfield has failed. Sarah says we should leave. I do not know how to explain to her that leaving would feel like admitting that difficulty is a reason and not a circumstance. She understands this, I think. She just needs me to say it plainly. Elias set down the harness. August 19th, 1844. Good harvest. Set aside the excess seed rather than selling the full yield. The merchant in town said I was foolish to hold back in a strong market. I think a strong market is exactly when you hold back. The lean years do not announce themselves in advance. He was right about that, Elias said quietly. November 3rd, 1851. I am 61 years old and my knees are bad and Sarah has been gone 4 years this winter and I am selling the farm. A family named Garrett has offered fair price and they seem like people who will work the land properly. I have finished the cellar, 20 years in the building of it, the last pieces added this past summer. I have written the letter and sealed it in the tool crate. I do not know if anyone will find it. I do not know if what I have left will be useful or will simply sit in the dark until it rots. But I built it to last. What happens to things built to last is not entirely in the builder's hands. Mercy closed the journal. She sat with her hands flat on its cover, the oilcloth smooth under her palms. He never knew, she said, whether it would matter. No, Elias agreed. He just built it anyway. Yes. She looked at the table. Vane's paper was still there, unfolded now. She'd looked at it properly that afternoon for the first time. $40. The parcel described in precise legal terms. The farmhouse, the barn, the north pasture, the east field, the well. Everything Tom had built or maintained. Everything Abner Foss had put his first seed into in 1831, $40. The seeds, she said, if they're viable, even a portion of them, Elias said, if even a third of the seed stock is still good, you're looking at enough to plant both fields come spring. The wheat varieties he put down, I looked at the labels. He selected for cold hardy strains, the kind that can go in early and survive a late frost. That's deliberate. He knew this valley. The tools, she said. Quality work. The saw and the chisels are salvageable with cleaning. The auger's perfect. Better made than anything you'd buy today, honestly. There's also a draw knife in there that I could use to finish the barn work better than what I've got. The food stores. Some of it's past using, he said carefully. The hardtack I wouldn't trust. The dried beans I'd need to check. But the salt pork, I smelled it when we were down there. It's still good. The fat is still good. The herbs, he paused. Willow bark is willow bark. It doesn't really go bad. She thought about what this meant. Not just for her. She was past the point of thinking about only herself, she realized, which was itself a kind of change. She thought about the families she knew in Callow Creek who were facing this winter badly. The Hendersons had lost their root cellar to flooding in October. The Marsh family had 3 children and a father who'd broken his leg in September and couldn't work the harvest. 2 or 3 other households she could think of, people who had worked hard and simply run into the kind of bad luck that farming regularly produced. I'm going to need to tell some people about this, she said. Elias looked at her. Which people? The ones who need it. She picked up her tea, which had gone cold. Not Vane. Not anyone who'd use the information to push on me harder. But there are people in this town who are going to have a very hard winter, and there is food sitting under my barn floor. He was quiet for a moment. That's your call to make, he said. It's your land. It was Abner Foss's land, she said. Then the Garrett's. Then Tom's. Then mine. She set the cup down. I don't think any of that makes it only mine. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face that she couldn't quite read, or maybe that she chose not to read too closely yet. All right, he said. What do you need me to do? Keep working on the barn, she said, and don't mention the cellar to anyone yet. I want to understand what's there before it becomes something other people are deciding about. He nodded. Fair enough. She picked up the journal again, turned to the first page. April 1832, it started. First real spring on the claim. The south field broke better than I expected. She read until the lamp needed refilling, and then she refilled it and kept reading. The next 2 weeks settled into a rhythm. Elias worked the barn. The east wall came together piece by piece. The new support posts fitted and seated properly, the secondary structure rebuilt from scratch where the rot had traveled. He didn't rush it. She'd expected him to push hard, the way a man in his situation might, trying to prove he was worth the cost of keeping. Instead, he moved at the pace the work required, which was slower than it looked, but more thorough than she'd ever seen. Tom had been a capable builder, but not a careful one. He built fast and fixed what broke later. Elias measured twice and then measured again, and when he wasn't sure of something, he stopped and thought it through before he touched it. He made mistakes. 2 of them, both in the first week. Once he cut a support timber a 1/4 inch short and had to go back to the mill for another piece, and he told her about it directly, without hedging. I cut it short. I'll need another length of 8-inch timber. No excuse, no explanation of how it happened, just the fact and the fix. The second mistake was more significant. He incorrectly assessed the load on the center roof beam and built the temporary support in the wrong position. And when he tested it, the beam shifted in a way that told him immediately he'd miscalculated. He took the support down and rebuilt it before she even knew there'd been a problem, but he told her about it that evening. I made a mistake on the center support today, he said. I had the load wrong. I rebuilt it. It's correct now. Was there any danger, she asked. Not much, he said. I was testing carefully, not loading it fully. I knew something was off before it became a problem. She looked at him. Most men wouldn't tell me that. Most men would rather manage your impression of them than keep you informed about your own property, he said. I'd rather you know what's happening. She thought about Tom, who had told her everything and also nothing, who had been honest about the farm and entirely closed about his own worry, who had spent his last 2 years shielding her from how serious things were getting until it was too late to plan. She thought about Vane, who was entirely transparent about his intentions in a way that was somehow more dishonest than lying. She thought about the men in town who'd given her advice over 3 years, advice that was almost always really about managing their own discomfort with her situation. Elias Rowan told her what was happening on her own property. It shouldn't have been remarkable. It was. Caleb had become her steady helper, showing up each morning without being asked, taking on whatever needed doing without requiring instruction beyond the first time. He learned fast, and he was honest about what he didn't know. He'd gotten that from his father, she thought. He'd also begun spending time in the barn with Elias in the late afternoons, watching the work and asking questions. Not too many questions and considered ones, the kind that suggested he'd been watching first and asking only when watching wasn't enough. Rose was more complicated. She was a child who had lost her mother less than a year ago and been walking since summer and was now living in a stranger's back room, and she was holding all of that with a seriousness that sometimes made Mercy's chest ache. But she had also, quietly and without making an announcement of it, begun to make herself useful in the kitchen. She remembered where things were after being shown once. She watched Mercy's methods without commenting and then reproduced them with small, careful modifications. The biscuits were better every batch, and she'd started adding the sugar the way she said her mother had, and she'd worked out on her own how to adjust the baking time for the wood stove's particular temperament. One afternoon, Mercy came in from outside to find Rose standing at the stove with her back turned, stirring something in the big pot with a wooden spoon. The smell was good, onion and salt pork and something herbal. "What is that?" Mercy asked. "Soup," Rose said without turning around. "I found the salt pork in the cellar, not the underground one, the regular one. And there were onions. I didn't know if you wanted me to use them, but they were starting to go soft, and I thought, Rose." She turned. Her expression was that guarded thing, braced for correction. "It smells fine," Mercy said. "What herb did you put in?" "Dried thyme. It was in the tin by the window. Was that all right?" "That's exactly right," Mercy said. "How did you know?" "My mother used it," Rose said, and turned back to the pot. Mercy stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, watching the small back, the careful stirring. She thought about what it meant to be 6 years old and know how to make soup because you'd watched your mother make it and your mother wasn't there anymore to be the one who made it. The way that knowledge sat in a child, practical and terrible at the same time. "Rose," she said. "Ma'am?" "You can call me Mercy." The stirring paused for just a second. "All right," Rose said, and then quietly, "Mercy." It was the word and the way she said it, not testing it, not performing it, just saying it, the way you say something that has been the right word all along and you were just waiting for permission. Mercy went to the window and looked out at the barn. She could hear the steady sound of Elias working, the hammer's rhythm, the saw, the occasional pause, and the sound of him thinking through the next step. She could hear Caleb out at the woodpile, the maul falling regular and even. This house had been quiet for 3 years. It was not quiet now. She wasn't sure exactly when she stopped thinking of them as people she'd made a bargain with and started thinking of them as something else. It wasn't a single moment. It was more like the way the light changed in November. Not suddenly dark, but gradually, the change noticeable only after the fact. The morning Harold Vane came back was a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the first visit. He didn't ride through the gate this time. He stopped at the fence and waited, which meant he'd seen the activity on the property and was reassessing. She saw him from the kitchen window and felt something tighten in her jaw. She went out alone. Elias was in the barn. She glanced back and could see him through the open doors, working on the loft frame. He'd seen Vane. She could tell by the way he'd stopped moving, alert without being visible about it. Vane looked at the barn. He looked at the lumber stacked near the east wall, the new posts visible through the doorway, the work that was clearly underway and clearly being done properly. "You found someone to do the work," he said. "I did," Mercy said. "Who's paying for it?" "That's my business." His eyes moved to the farmhouse window where Rose was visible, peering out with that particular child's lack of self-consciousness about being seen. Vane's gaze moved on toward the woodpile, where the result of weeks of splitting was stacked in a neat cord and a half. "You've been busy," he said. His tone was the kind of neutral that isn't neutral, the kind that means recalculating. "I have," Mercy said. He looked back at her. "My offer stands," he said. $40. "I heard you the first 3 times," she said. "The answer is still no." Something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger yet, but the thing that precedes it. "Mercy," he said, and this time, her name in his mouth felt like a hand on her shoulder she hadn't invited. "I'm trying to help you. The winter's going to be hard. You're well held this year, but it's been inconsistent. Another summer like the last one, and you may not have water." "Then I'll deal with that summer when it comes," she said. "Or you could take $40 now and not have to deal with anything." He looked at her steadily. "Your husband left you a losing hand. There's no shame in knowing when to fold." The same words as before. She'd wondered if he'd remember he'd already used them. "Tom didn't leave me a losing hand," she said. "He left me a farm that needs work. Those are different things." She looked at him. "Harold, how much is the East Field worth if the wheat comes back strong next spring?" He was quiet for a moment. "The wheat's not coming back." "How do you know?" "The soil's exhausted. The frost killed what was in the ground," she said. "The soil's the soil. It's been resting since August." She held his gaze. "How much is the East Field worth, Harold, with a strong spring planting?" His jaw tightened slightly. "You don't have seed stock." "How much is it worth?" she said again. He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. "The next time you come," Mercy said, "bring a number that makes sense for what the land is worth. Not $40. a real number. She paused. Or don't come at all, which would suit me better. She went back inside before he could respond. She stood at the kitchen counter with her back to the window and listened until she heard his horse move away from the fence. Rosa was still at the window. He's leaving, she reported. Good, Mercy said. He looked angry. He looked like a man who'd planned for something and had to revise his plan, Mercy said. Which is a little like angry, but not quite. Rose considered this with the focused expression she brought to things she was thinking through seriously. Do you think he'll come back? Yes, Mercy said, but that's all right. She meant it. For the first time in 2 years, she actually meant it. She went to the back porch and called toward the barn. Elias. He appeared in the doorway. He gone? He's gone. She paused. I need you to look at the north pasture fence when you get a chance. Not urgently, but when you can. He studied her expression for a moment. All right, he said, and went back to work. That afternoon, she went down into the cellar again by herself with the lantern and Abner Foss's journal, and she sat on the bottom step and read the entry from the drought year of 1838, when Foss had planted late and harvested thin and written in a cramped, careful hand. The land is not against us. The land does not have intentions. The difficulty is real, but it is not personal. And treating difficulty as personal is how a man defeats himself before the season can do it. She sat with that for a while. The cellar was cool and dry, and the shelves were full of things a stranger had left for her decades before she existed. Above her head, through the floor, she could hear the barn alive with work. Hammer blows and the scrape of a plane, and once, Caleb's voice asking his father something, and Elias's answer, low and clear. She was not, she thought, simply surviving anymore. She wasn't sure what she was doing instead, not exactly. But it was something else, something that required a different word, and she didn't have the word yet. She opened the journal to the next page and kept reading. The north pasture fence told Elias everything he needed to know, and none of it was accidental. He walked the full line on a Thursday morning, the ground frozen hard enough to ring under his boots, Caleb beside him because the boy had started appearing wherever Elias went, without being invited and without being unwelcome. They walked the fence from the gatepost all the way to the corner where the north and east lines met, and Elias stopped every 10 or 15 feet and crouched and looked and didn't say anything for a long time. Caleb, to his credit, didn't ask. He'd learned to read when his father was thinking and when he was ready to talk, and he waited. At the fourth post from the corner, Elias found what he was looking for. He pulled his glove off and ran his bare fingers along the base of the post, then down into the frozen dirt around it. The post was loose, not rotted, not damaged by weather. It had been pulled partially free and reset improperly, the way you'd set a post if you wanted it to look intact but fail under pressure. He'd seen it once before, years ago, on a property dispute outside Dellard. A man who wanted his neighbor's fence to fall had done the same thing. Not destroyed it outright, but undermined it so that the next heavy snow or the next animal leaning against it would finish the job. He rocked the post in its socket. It moved half an inch. Pa, Caleb said quietly, I see it. That's not weather damage. No, Elias said. It isn't. He stood up and pulled his glove back on and looked down the rest of the fence line. Now that he knew what he was looking for, he could see it in 3 more posts. A slight lean that wasn't consistent with the surrounding ground, the disturbed earth around the base that was wrong for the season. Someone had walked this fence line in the fall, before the ground froze, and worked each post just enough. Not enough to make it obvious, enough to make the fence fail at the first real test. He didn't say anything to Caleb about what it meant, but Caleb was 10 and had been paying attention to everything for weeks, and when they got back to the barn and Elias asked him to start cleaning the hinges on the new stall door, Caleb said, without looking up, You're going to tell Mercy. Yes, Elias said. And then what? Elias picked up his hammer and looked at the boy. I don't know yet, he said. That's her decision to make, not mine. He told Mercy that evening. He laid it out plainly, which post, what he'd found, what it meant. He didn't editorialize. He didn't say Vane's name, though it sat in the room between them like a third person. She listened with her hands flat on the table and her face still. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. How many posts? She asked. 4 that I found. There may be more under the snow along the east line. I couldn't get to those without digging. Can you fix them? Ground's frozen. I can brace them for now. Drive secondary stakes alongside and bind them. That'll hold through the winter. In spring I can pull and reset properly. She nodded slowly. Do that. Mercy. He waited until she looked at him directly. This isn't negligence. Someone did this on purpose, carefully, in a way that looks like deterioration. If you go to the sheriff with this, it's hard to prove. I know, she said, but if you document it, if I write down what I found, where, what it looked like, and you get a second set of eyes on it before I do the repair, who else would look at it? He thought for a moment. Bill Hargrove, he said. He's seen enough property damage to know the difference, and he clearly cares what happens to you even if he shows it badly. She was quiet again. The lamp flickered between them, a draft from somewhere, the old house breathing. All right, she said. Tomorrow morning, before you brace them, we'll get Bill. Bill Hargrove came the next morning with his coat half-buttoned and his expression skeptical, the look of a man who'd been pulled out early and wasn't certain it was worth his while. He walked the fence line with Elias in silence, crouching at each post, pressing his own hands into the soil the way Elias had done. He didn't say anything until they were back at the gate. That's not weather, he said. His voice had gone flat. No, Elias said. Hargrove looked at Mercy. You have any idea when it was done? Before the first hard freeze, she said. October, probably. Maybe late September. He rubbed the back of his neck. Harold Vane made you another offer recently? 3 weeks ago, she said. Same $40. Hargrove's jaw worked. He was a man with a direct relationship with his own anger. He didn't hide it well, which she'd always found easier to deal with than the other kind. You want me to talk to the sheriff? He asked. Not yet, Mercy said. You'd be his word against mine, and Harold Vane has been in this county for 20 years. I need something more than a loose fence post. Then what do you want from me? I want you to have seen it, she said simply. That's all. I want someone besides me and Elias to know what's here. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Elias in the way that men look at each other when they are deciding something about a third party, which Mercy generally found irritating but let pass. You do good work, Hargrove said to Elias. I looked at the east wall when I came in. That's a proper repair. Thank you, Elias said. You're staying through the winter? That's the plan. Hargrove nodded once, something decided in his face. He looked back at Mercy. I'll come by after the snow, for the east fence line. She hadn't asked for that. Thank you, Bill. He waved it off and walked back to his horse. She watched him go, feeling something she hadn't felt in 2 years. The particular warmth of someone choosing to be on your side without you having to persuade them. The days that followed were cold and productive in the way that winter preparation is productive. Not the kind of work that looks like much, but the kind that matters when things go wrong. Elias finished the east wall and moved to the roof, which was the more delicate problem. The center beam was the main concern. It had bowed under years of uneven load, not enough to be structurally critical yet, but close enough that another hard winter could change that. Straightening a bowed beam in place was the kind of work that required patience and incremental pressure and a willingness to stop when the wood told you to stop. He worked on it for 3 days. Mercy didn't watch. She had her own work, but she could hear it, the particular sounds of controlled effort, the long pauses that meant he was reading the wood. Caleb was up there with him on the 2nd and 3rd days, handing things, holding things, learning without being taught in the explicit sense. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Elias came in for coffee with his hands shaking slightly from cold and the sustained tension of the work. It's straight, he said. She handed him the coffee and didn't make a thing of the shaking hands. How'd you do it? Slowly, he said, which made her almost smile. He sat down, and she sat across from him, and for a few minutes, neither of them said anything. Rose came through the kitchen, paused, looked at them both, and went back to whatever she'd been doing in the back room. She had developed a child's intuition for when adults needed a room. What did your wife's name? Mercy asked. She wasn't sure why she asked it then. It had been in the back of her mind for weeks, but something about the quiet of that particular moment made it feel like the right time. Elias looked at his coffee. Clara, he said. Was she... Mercy stopped, trying to find a question that wasn't intrusive. She was practical, he said, which was not what she expected. Not cold, just... She knew what things were worth, and she didn't waste time pretending otherwise. She was better at the hard conversations than I was. He turned the cup in his hands. When she got sick, she told me exactly what to do. For the children. What they'd need, who to talk to, how to manage. She made a list. He stopped. I couldn't look at the list for 2 months after she died, and then when I finally looked at it, every item on it was right. Mercy thought about Tom, who had shielded her from hard things and left her unprepared for the hardest one. Tom protected me from worrying, she said. He thought that was kindness. The farm was worse than I knew when he died. Why, he'd been managing the debt quietly for 2 years, not telling me. She looked at her own hands. I found out when the bank wrote to me, 3 weeks after the funeral. That must have been... It was very bad, she said plainly. And then I was angry at him, which was also very bad, because you can't resolve anything with someone who isn't there. She paused. I eventually decided he did it out of love, and that love doesn't excuse it, but it explains it. And that was about as far as I could get. Elias was quiet. Clara would have said that was a reasonable place to land. She sounds like she was sensible. The most sensible person I've ever known, he said. And then after a moment, she would have liked you. It was a simple thing to say. She chose to take it as simply as it was offered. The south field, she said, shifting. When the ground's ready in spring, I want to test the Foss seed. I've been thinking about what varieties he stored and in what quantities. If even half the wheat is viable, we have enough for a real planting. He looked up. We, he noted. She met his gaze steadily. You'll still be here in spring, she said. It wasn't a question. Quite. He held her look. I'll still be here, he said. Also not quite a question. Something settled between them that neither of them named, because it didn't need naming yet. It just needed to exist. The storm announced itself 3 days early, the way bad weather sometimes does. A shift in the air pressure that made Fletcher pace his stall, and the chickens refused to come out of the henhouse, and the sky take on that particular yellow-gray color that meant the clouds were carrying more than they should. Mercy had grown up in this valley, and she knew what that sky meant. She told Elias that evening. 2 days, she said. Maybe less. I've seen this before. He'd seen it too. He'd been watching the sky all afternoon. How bad? Bad enough, she said. The kind that shuts the roads for a week. They spent the next 2 days in preparation. That was almost military in its focus. Elias reinforced the temporary bracing he'd put on the roof. Not the permanent solution, which required weather he didn't have, but enough to handle significant load. He brought extra hay into the barn for Fletcher and the 2 goats. He checked every joint on the east wall he'd rebuilt, every new post seat, every brace point. Mercy worked the house. She and Rose packed every window draft with rags and rope caulk, banked the exterior foundation with the straw she kept for the purpose, filled every vessel that would hold water from the well while it was still accessible. She sent Caleb to the root cellar 3 times to bring up what they'd need for a week without going outside. The cellar, Foss's cellar, as she'd started thinking of it, she checked separately. The trapdoor was properly seated. The coal down there was the right kind, steady, and dry. She brought up 6 jars of the dried beans and a wrapped portion of the salt pork and put them in the kitchen, just in case. The storm hit at 2 in the morning. She woke to the sound of it. Not the wind itself first, but the change in the house's sounds, the way the walls shifted and the roof spoke differently, the creak of the structure settling against lateral force. She was out of bed and dressed before she was fully conscious of having decided to get up. The kitchen window showed her nothing but white. The snow was already horizontal, driven hard enough that the lantern light from inside caught it and turned it into a solid wall. She couldn't see the barn. She heard movement in the back room. Elias appeared in the doorway, already in his coat and boots. "The barn," he said. "I know," she said, and went for her coat. They couldn't take a lantern outside. The wind would have had it out in 10 seconds. They went on feel and memory, and the rope guideline Elias had rigged between the house and the barn during the preparation days, which turned out to be one of the best decisions either of them had made. Without it, 10 feet from the door, she would have lost direction completely. The snow was not falling so much as occupying the air, dense and disorienting, the cold of it different from ordinary cold, the kind that found the gap at your collar and the space at your wrists and worked inward immediately. She held the rope with both hands and moved. Elias was just ahead of her. She could see him only as a darker shape against the white. The barn was louder than the outside. That was the first thing. Inside the walls, the wind was a constant pressure roar, the structure itself groaning under it in a way that was deeply uncomfortable to hear. Fletcher was moving in his stall, not panicked, but alert and unhappy. The goats had pressed into the corner together. The chickens she'd brought inside earlier were in the crate she'd prepared, sensibly still. Elias went straight for the roof supports. The new work on the east wall was holding. She could see it in the lamplight he got going, the joints tight, no movement. The center beam was the question. He climbed to the loft and she heard him above her, moving across the structure, checking every point of his work. "The brace is holding," he called down. "The west corner," she called back. She'd seen something in the lamplight, a shadow of movement at the upper corner of the west wall, an older section he hadn't gotten to yet. She moved that direction. The west corner post was torquing under the load. She could see it now, a slight but visible twist in the wood as the wind pushed against the wall face. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was progressing. "Elias." She didn't yell it, but her voice carried. He was down from the loft in under a minute. He saw what she was looking at immediately. "I need a shore," he said, already scanning the barn. "Something to take the lateral load." He moved to the timber pile along the south wall. Offcuts and salvage from the east wall work, kept just in case. He found what he needed, a 8-foot length of 4x6 solid oak. "Hold the lantern," he said. She held it. He worked fast, faster than she expected from someone who was usually deliberate, the speed of a man who understood exactly what the situation required and had compressed his thinking accordingly. He fitted the shore timber against the west post at an angle, driving the foot against a floor joist to lock it, then used the last 3 wedges from the timber pile to tighten the fit until the shore was carrying load. The twist in the post stopped. They both stood there for a moment, watching it, making sure. "That'll hold," he said. He wasn't certain. She could hear it, but it was an informed assessment, not a wish. "The roof on the west side," she said. He looked up. The roof over the unrenovated west section was the oldest part of the barn. She'd known it was a concern, he'd known it was a concern, and they'd both understood it was the next job after the beamwork. In decent weather. Not in the middle of a storm. "I can get up there," he said. "Elias." "The snow load on the west section is the risk," he said. "If I can get up and clear some of it off while the storm's running, we reduce the stress. It's manageable." She looked at him. The lamp between them, the storm pressing against every wall, the barn groaning in a way that barns shouldn't, but sometimes did and survived. "I'm going with you," she said. "Mercy, I'm not standing here holding the lamp while you're on the roof in this wind alone," she said. "2 people is safer than 1. I know this barn." He looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then, "All right, you go first. I'll hand you the roof rake." The roof rake was a long-handled tool, almost 10 feet, that she'd used in previous winters to pull snow off the house eaves. Elias had it from the south wall, and they went back to the barn door and out into the storm and along the wall to the ladder that ran up the west exterior. She went up first. The rungs were slicked with ice, and the wind pushed at her like something with intent, a lateral pressure that she had to lean into constantly or it would move her. She kept her hands tight and moved 1 rung at a time, not looking down, not looking up, just the next rung. The roof at the eave was accessible from the top of the ladder. She got the roof rake handle from Elias below her and went to work, dragging the accumulated snow off the west section in heavy loads that fell away into the dark. The snow was wet and dense, the kind that carried real weight. Each pass of the rake pulled 30 pounds clear. Her shoulders ached before the 3rd pass. Elias came up beside her and took the rake on the next pass. They alternated without discussion, a rhythm they found because the situation required one. Her hands were past cold. They had become the kind of numb that is its own information, telling her she needed to get inside before she lost the use of them. "Enough," Elias said after 20 minutes. He'd read the same thing. The critical area was clear. The roof had its own pitch to shed the rest, and staying longer was diminishing return against real risk. Down. They came off the roof the way they'd gone up, careful and fast, and made their way back along the wall to the barn door. Inside, they stood in the relative quiet, and both of them were breathing hard, the kind of breath that comes from cold and sustained effort, and the body's insistence on recording what it's been through. She looked at her hands. They were clumsy and pale. "Kitchen," Elias said. "Now." They went through the storm back to the house, following the rope. Inside the kitchen, she started the fire up and held her hands toward it, and Elias put the kettle on without asking. The same way she'd put coffee in front of him without asking. The ease of people who'd been in the same house long enough. Caleb was in the kitchen doorway. He'd been awake. She'd assumed as much. "The barn?" he asked. "It'll hold," Elias said. Caleb nodded once, the way his father nodded, and went back to bed. Rose appeared half a second after he left, standing in the doorway in her nightgown with a blanket around her shoulders, looking at both of them with the specific assessing look she used when she was deciding how worried to be. "Your hands are white," she said to Mercy. "They'll come back," Mercy said. Rose disappeared and came back 30 seconds later with a pair of wool stockings, her own from the look of them. And before Mercy understood what she was doing, Rose had taken Mercy's hands and pulled the stockings over them, 1 on each hand, the wool rough and immediate and warmer than anything else in the room. Mercy looked at the small face, intent and serious. "My mother used to do this," Rose said, after she'd been out in cold. Mercy did not trust herself to speak for a moment. "Thank you," she said, when she could. Rose nodded and climbed onto the chair beside her and leaned against her arm, not asking, not commenting, simply there, the straightforward pragmatism of a child who had decided something without making an announcement of it. Elias, across the table, watched this with an expression that he didn't try to control and that she didn't try to interpret except to know it was real. The storm ran through the rest of that night and into the next day, and they stayed inside and waited it out. She made soup from the stores in the root cellar. Real soup, substantial, with the salt pork and the dried beans she'd brought up and the last of the winter squash. The children played a card game she taught them, an old game her mother had taught her, and Elias read from the Foss Almanac and occasionally read something aloud, a note in the margins that Foss had made about planting times or soil amendment, and she'd respond and they'd talk about it, and the hours passed, the way hours pass when the people around you are engaged in the same weather and the same warmth. At some point in the afternoon, she went to the window and looked out at the white. The barn was still standing. She could see it through the snow. The clean line of the repaired east wall, the roof she and Elias had worked on in the dark, the solid shape of it against the storm. Tom's barn, Abner Foss's ground, Elias's work, hers. She thought about what Harold Vane had said weeks ago. Your husband left you a losing hand. She stood at the window and looked at the barn standing in the worst storm of the season and thought, no, he didn't. But she had also built something herself in these weeks. That was the part she was still figuring out how to hold. The part that was not Tom's legacy and not Foss's cellar and not Elias's labor, but something she had made by opening a gate and making a decision and not explaining herself to anyone who didn't deserve an explanation. Caleb appeared at her shoulder, looking out at the same view. "It's still there," he said. "It is," she said. He stood beside her for a moment, both of them watching the barn and the storm. "Mercy," he said. He'd started using her name the day after Rose did, with the same matter-of-fact quality as if he'd simply been waiting for the door to open. If the seeds in the cellar are good," he said carefully, "and if the spring planting goes well, do you think there would be enough work here for 2 people to manage it?" She looked at him. He was looking straight out the window, his jaw set in a way that reminded her intensely of his father. She understood what he was asking. Not just what the words said, what was underneath them. The question a 10-year-old asks when he's afraid of hoping for something, and asking directly feels too risky. "I think," she said, "that 2 people and 2 children would be about the right number for this particular farm." He kept looking out the window. But something in his shoulder released. "Okay," he said, nothing. Like it wasn't everything. Outside, the storm continued. The barn held. The lamp in the kitchen window cast its light across the snow, and if anyone had been standing at the fence looking in, they would have seen a house that was lit from inside in a way it hadn't been lit in years. The storm left 3 feet of snow and a silence so complete it had weight. Mercy stood at the kitchen window the morning after and looked out at a landscape that had been rearranged overnight. The fence lines buried, the road to town invisible. The barn sitting in a field of white with only its dark roof line showing clearly against the pale sky. The barn was intact. She'd gone out at first light to confirm it, walking the perimeter in knee-deep snow, checking each wall, each corner. The west section had shed its load cleanly. The east wall Elias had rebuilt was indistinguishable from solid ground. Not a shift, not a crack in the mortar, not a joint that had moved. Whatever the storm had intended, the barn had not cooperated. She came back inside to find Rose already at the stove and Caleb pulling on his second boot with the focus of a boy who had somewhere to be, which in this case was outside with a shovel. "Eat first," she said. "I'm not hungry." "Caleb." He ate. It took 4 minutes, which was not eating so much as processing food, but she let it stand. Elias came in from the back porch where he'd been checking the woodpile situation. They'd used more than expected during the night, keeping the stove hot while the temperature dropped. He stamped the snow from his boots at the door and looked at the table, at the children, at Mercy. "Road's going to be shut for days," he said. "I know," she said. "The Henderson place is about a mile north," he said. "I saw smoke from their chimney when I was out, but the Marsh family..." He stopped. She knew what he was stopping at. The Marsh place was 2 miles south, and Daniel Marsh had broken his leg in September. She'd thought about them during the storm. Ellen Marsh, with 3 children and a husband who couldn't walk without help, sitting in whatever they had left after a harvest that had been thin to begin with. "We can't get there yet," she said. "No," he agreed. "Not today. But in 2 days, when the snow settles and there's a crust, I can get there on foot," he said, "if you can spare what we'd bring." She thought about Foss's cellar, The dried beans, the salt pork, the lamp oil. She thought about what Foss had written, "Share what you can." "We'll figure out what to bring," she said. They ate breakfast, all four of them, and the conversation was practical. The woodpile, the animals, what needed to be done in what order. Rose had made porridge without being asked, which was good, because it used less of their stores than biscuits and was hotter. Caleb drank his coffee. She'd started giving him a half cup in the mornings, which Elias had not commented on, possibly because Caleb had been doing the work of a grown person and the coffee seemed fair. After breakfast, Elias and Caleb went out to dig. She could hear them, the rhythmic scrape and heave of shovels, Caleb's occasional comment, Elias's shorter responses. She went down into Foss's cellar with the lantern and began the careful work of inventory, which she'd been doing in pieces over the past weeks but needed to do properly now. She worked through every crate, the dried beans, 4 crates, each holding about 40 pounds. Still good. She'd soaked a sample batch 2 weeks ago and they'd cooked properly. The salt pork, 8 wrapped portions in the largest crate, each enough for several meals. She'd used 1, 7 remained. The grain stores were the most complex question. She'd been thinking about them constantly. The seed wheat in the sealed jars was what she was saving for spring planting, but there was also a separate crate marked coarse ground, meal, and when she opened it, the contents were exactly that. Cornmeal packed in layers of oilcloth, dry and clean. She pressed a handful and smelled it. Old but not rancid. Not ideal, but usable. She made her calculations on the back of Vane's paper, which seemed like the right surface for them. What they had in the house, what was down here, what 4 people needed through the rest of the winter, what could be shared without leaving them short. It was not a comfortable calculation, but it worked. Just barely. It worked. She folded the paper and put it back in her pocket and went upstairs. By the second day, the snow had settled enough for travel on foot if you were careful. Elias went to the marsh place carrying a pack he'd rigged from canvas and rope, dried beans, a wrapped portion of salt pork, a bladder of lamp oil, and 2 of the herb bundles from Foss's medical crate, because Ellen Marsh had mentioned in October that her youngest had a chest that went bad every winter and willow bark was worth having. He was gone 4 hours. She spent the time working, mending, organizing, thinking. Rose stayed close to the kitchen, which was her habit when Elias was gone, the particular vigilance of a child who had learned the hard way that people could leave and not come back. Mercy didn't comment on it. She just found reasons to stay in the kitchen herself. When Elias came back, he sat down at the table and she put coffee in front of him and waited. "They're bad," he said. "Not in danger, but bad." The woodpile was nearly gone. "Daniel can't manage the axe and Ellen's been doing what she can, but she's exhausted." He looked at the coffee. "The youngest has a cough. I left the willow bark and showed Ellen how to make the tea." "Did she ask where the supplies came from?" "She asked," he said. "I told her you had stores and wanted to share." "What did she say?" He was quiet for a moment. "She cried," he said, which was uncomfortable, "and then she asked me to thank you." He looked up. "She also said," and this is her words, "that she'd been wrong about you taking in strangers and she was sorry she'd thought it." Mercy looked at her hands. She wasn't sure what she felt about that. Something that was not quite forgiveness and not quite satisfaction, but somewhere between them. "She didn't have to say that," Mercy said. "No," Elias agreed, "but she did." Word moved through a small town the way water moves through soil, slow and invisible, and then suddenly everywhere at once. By the end of the week, 3 more households had come to her fence. Not demanding, not entitled, the storm had humbled people in the particular way that serious weather humbles people, stripping away the social performances and leaving something more honest underneath. The Dietz family came first, Clara and her husband Martin, whom Mercy had always found more decent than his wife. Their root cellar had flooded during the storm, not deeply, but enough to ruin the potato stores and wet the grain sacks. Clara stood at the fence with an expression that cost her something. Mercy could see it costing her, which she tried not to take any satisfaction in. "I heard you had extra stores," Clara said. "I know we haven't always." She stopped, started again. "I'm asking for help, Mercy, if you have it to spare." "Come in," Mercy said. She brought them potatoes from her own cellar, not Foss's, her own stores that she'd carefully preserved. 2 sacks, enough for a month. She added a portion of dried beans. When Clara tried to offer payment, Mercy shook her head. "When the spring comes," she said, "I'm going to need help planting, both fields. If you want to square something, that's how." Clara looked at her for a long moment. "All right," she said, and then, unexpectedly, "The man who's been working your barn, Elias Rowan." "Yes?" Martin says he does good work. Solid work. She paused. Martin has a shop building that needs the roof redone in the spring. He was going to do it himself, but his back's not right. If Rowan is looking for work after your barn's finished, I'll mention it, Mercy said. It went like that for the next several days. Careful people, embarrassed people, people who had said unkind things or thought unkind things and now needed something. She helped who she could and declined who she couldn't. And she kept track of it all in a small notebook because keeping track was the only way to make sure she didn't give so much that she left herself with nothing. Elias watched all of it without comment. He kept working. There was still the west section of the barn to address, and he'd moved on to it with the same methodical patience he'd brought to the east. But she noticed that he was more present in the house during the hours when neighbors came. Not intrusive, not obvious, just available. In case. She didn't say anything about it, but she was aware of it. It was Hargrove who brought the larger trouble to her door, and he came with his hat in his hands in the way of a man delivering news he doesn't want to be delivering. He came on a Thursday, 12 days after the storm. The road to town was passable now, and she'd been expecting him. She'd sent Caleb with a note asking him to come when he could. He came into the kitchen and sat down and didn't take coffee right away, which told her something. "The fence posts," she said. "Did you find more?" "I found more," he said, after the snow melted enough to check the east line. 4 more posts, same treatment. He looked at his hat. And something else. She waited. "The well casing," he said. "I looked at it while I was checking the east fence. The casing's been interfered with. There's tool marks on the stone that aren't from installation or maintenance. Someone tried to crack it. Didn't succeed, but they tried." The room was very still. "When?" she asked. "Hard to say. Before the freeze, which means fall, same window as the fence posts." She looked at the table. She thought about what Vane had said last spring. Your well's been inconsistent. The way he'd said it, not asking, noting, the way a man notes something he's been watching. "That's enough for the sheriff," Elias said from the doorway. She hadn't heard him come in. He was holding a plane he'd been using on the barn trim. He'd stopped mid-stride, she could see, the moment he heard Hargrove's voice shift. "Fence posts are one thing. Deliberate damage to a well casing is property destruction. That's criminal." "It's also hard to prove who did it," Hargrove said, but his tone said he thought the same thing Elias thought. "Do you have any doubt?" Elias asked. Hargrove was quiet. "Bill," Mercy said. He looked at her. "Do you have any doubt?" she asked. "No," he said. "No, I don't." He put his hat on the table. "The problem is that Vane is connected in this county. The sheriff, Aldous Pruitt. He and Vane go back. They're not friends exactly, but they're the kind of acquaintances who do each other favors." "So, going to Pruitt is pointless," Elias said. "Going to Pruitt without something solid is pointless," Hargrove corrected. "He'd listen, he'd nod, and then Vane would hear about it before dark and adjust whatever he was planning." Mercy had been thinking since Hargrove said the words tool marks. She'd been thinking about the county seat, which was Dellard, not Callow Creek. The county land office was in Dellard. The county circuit judge, who traveled through on a regular schedule, was not beholden to Aldous Pruitt or Harold Vane or anyone in Callow Creek. "The property records," she said. "When we bought this land, Tom went through the records carefully. The original homestead claim, the Garrett sale, our purchase. All of that is filed in Dellard." "Yes," Hargrove said slowly. "If someone were to go to Dellard," she said, "and file a formal complaint of property damage with the county office, not with the local sheriff, but with the county, and attach to that complaint a written account from 2 witnesses of what was found." Hargrove looked at her. Then he looked at Elias, then back at her. "That would go to the circuit judge," he said. "Who comes through Callow Creek in March?" she said. "I looked it up." Hargrove picked up his hat from the table and turned it in his hands. "You've been thinking about this for a while." "Since the first fence post," she said. He almost smiled. "Your husband used to say you were the sharper of the 2 of you. He said it like a compliment, which it was." She hadn't known Tom had said that. It landed somewhere soft. "Will you write it down?" she asked. "What you found, both times. Dated, signed." "Yes," he said, "and I'll find you a second witness for the well casing. Martin Dietz was with me when I looked at it. He lives out that direction and came along." He paused. "He'll sign it." "I know he will," she said. After Hargrove left, Elias came fully into the kitchen and set the plane down on the counter and looked at her with the expression she'd come to recognize. The one that was deciding whether to say something. "Say it," she said. "Vane is going to find out," he said. "When you file in Dellard, it'll get back to him, These things always do. I know. And when it does, he's going to... I don't know what he'll do, but he won't be patient about it. I know that too, she said. I've been waiting for him to stop being patient for 2 years. At least now when it happens, I'll have something in front of the county instead of just my word. He looked at her for a moment. I want to go with you, he said, to Dellard, when you file. It's a 3-hour ride. I know how far it is. She looked at him. Elias, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, he said. I want to. He picked up the plane again, not because he needed it, but because he didn't know what to do with his hands. You shouldn't go alone. Not with this. She considered refusing on principle. She'd been going places alone for 3 years and managing, but she thought about what it actually meant to have someone who wanted to come. Not someone who thought she needed protection. Not someone who doubted she could handle it. Someone who wanted to be there. All right, she said, when the road's clear enough for the wagon. They went to Dellard on a Tuesday 10 days later, when the road had packed down enough for Fletcher to manage it without fighting. Rose and Caleb stayed with the Hargrove family in town. A negotiation Hargrove had initiated himself, appearing at the farm 2 days before the trip and announcing that his wife had said the children were welcome, and that wasn't a question. The ride to Dellard took just under 3 hours. They didn't talk constantly. They were past the point of filling silence for its own sake. She drove, which was her preference, on her own wagon, and he sat beside her and occasionally pointed out something about the road conditions or the surrounding land. Once, passing a farm that had clearly been abandoned before the winter hit, he said, "Drought took them?" "Last summer," she said, 3 families left the county." He was quiet. "How close were you?" She looked at the road. "I had enough to get through the winter," she said, "but if I hadn't found Foss's stores, spring planting would have been the question." She paused. "So close enough." He nodded. She didn't add anything. Some distances were clear enough without measuring. The county land office in Dellard was a low brick building on the main street, run by a clerk named Hedges, who had the organized manner of a man who had decided early in life that paperwork was a form of justice. He listened to Mercy's account with a fountain pen poised over a ledger, asking precise questions in the flat tone of someone who had heard many complaints and filed them without prejudice. When she was done, he looked at the written statements she'd brought, Hargrove's and Dietz's, each dated and signed. 2 witnesses, he said, for the fence posts and 1 for the well casing damage. Hargrove for both, she said. Dietz for the well only. Hargrove's known to this office, Hedges said, not as a compliment or a criticism, just a fact. His statement carries weight. He made a note. You're alleging deliberate property interference, not accidental damage. Yes, she said, deliberate and systematic over at least 6 months. You've named no individual in this complaint, he observed. I'm naming the damage, she said. The individual is for the judge to determine. Hedges looked at her over his glasses. You've thought about how this works. I've had time, she said. He stamped the complaint form and gave her a copy. The circuit judge, he looked at a calendar on the wall, is in Callow Creek the 3rd week of March. He'll have this by then. He paused. In the meantime, if there is further damage to your property, you should document it immediately and send word here directly. Don't go through the local office. She understood what he was telling her. She thanked him. Outside, Elias was waiting with the wagon. He saw her face when she came through the door and read it correctly. Done? He asked. Done, she said. She folded the copy of the complaint carefully and put it in her coat pocket. Vane's paper had been in that pocket for weeks. She'd kept it, she realized, as a reminder of what he wanted and what she was refusing. The complaint sat beside it now, and the two together felt like an answer to a question that had been sitting on her kitchen table for 2 years. She climbed up onto the wagon. The return journey was quieter than the trip out, the way a journey home often is when the thing you went to do is done. The light changed while they drove, the winter afternoon dropping fast, and by the time they were 20 minutes from Callow Creek, the sky had gone the deep blue of early evening. Elias said, unexpectedly, I've been offered work. She looked at him. What kind? Martin Dietz spoke to me last week, he said, about the shop roof I mentioned, and then Bill Hargrove's got a storage building he wants raised in the spring. He looked at the road, and a man named Pickett. He came to your fence asking for beans. Mentioned his barn needs the same east wall problem yours had. She had not known about Pickett. When were you talking to Pickett? The day you sent me to check on the Henderson place, he said. He was on his way back from there. We walked together for a bit. She considered this. So you have work. I have the possibility of work, he said, starting in spring, if I'm in Callow Creek in spring. He was looking at the road, not at her. The original bargain was the barn for the winter. The barn will be finished before spring. The wagon moved. Fletcher's breath made small clouds in the cold air. Caleb asked me, she said, about 2 months ago, whether there'd be enough work on the farm for 2 people to manage. He turned to look at her. I told him 2 people and 2 children would be about the right number, she said. He was very still for a moment. You told a 10-year-old that before you told me. He asked, she said. You hadn't yet. Something moved across his face, something that wasn't entirely comfortable and wasn't entirely comfortable on purpose. The expression of a man who was feeling more than he'd planned to feel in a wagon on a country road. Mercy, he said. You don't have to decide anything right now, she said. I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. I know, he said, but I want to say something. She waited. When I walked up to your fence, he said slowly, with nothing to offer except a bargain I wasn't sure you'd take. I was not thinking past the week. I was not thinking about anything except getting my children through the next month. He paused. I have not stopped thinking past the week since about the 3rd day. She looked at him. He looked back. All right, she said. All right, he said. They didn't say anything else about it, but the silence on the rest of the drive was different from before, the kind that has something in it instead of nothing. They were half a mile from Callow Creek when they saw the smoke. It was the wrong kind, not the clean column of a chimney, but a wide, low spread of gray-black against the darkening sky, the kind that meant something large was burning. Elias saw it at the same moment she did. Where is that? He asked. She looked at the direction, calculating. Her stomach dropped. That's the Henderson place, she said. He didn't say anything. She clicked Fletcher into a faster pace. The Henderson barn was already gone by the time they arrived. It had gone fast, the old wood dry even in winter, and what was left was a pile of black timber still glowing at the edges. James Henderson and his oldest son were standing in the snow watching it with the blank faces of men who had stopped fighting something that couldn't be fought. Mary Henderson was at the house door, her youngest on her hip, her expression the particular flat shock of a woman doing the calculation of what they'd just lost. Elias was off the wagon before it fully stopped. I went to James Henderson, and they talked in low voices. She couldn't hear it all, but she caught the shape of it. James's voice cracking once and then going flat again. Elias is steady and asking practical questions. When it started, how fast? Was anyone hurt? What did they get out? No one was hurt. They'd gotten the livestock out. Everything else, the stored hay, the tools, the 2 saddles, a winter's worth of supplies, was in the smoking pile. Mary Henderson looked at Mercy across the yard. She was a woman Mercy had known for 10 years and never been close to. They were neighbors in the practical sense, sharing a road and a county, but not much more. Mary had been polite and nothing deeper, but she was looking at Mercy now with an expression that had nothing careful in it. I don't know what we're going to do, Mary said, not to Mercy particularly, just said. Mercy got down from the wagon. Come to the house tomorrow, she said. Bring James, bring the children. Mary looked at her. We'll figure out what you need, Mercy said, and we'll figure out what we can do about it. Not tonight. Tonight you need to get those children warm, but tomorrow. Mary Henderson looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded, the nod of a woman who was too tired to do anything except accept what was offered. On the drive home, Elias was quiet. She let him be quiet. After a mile, he said, The barn fire. Yes, she said. The Henderson barn was old, but barns don't usually go that fast, he said. Not in winter. Not with wet snow still on the ground. She kept her eyes on the road. No, she said. They don't. He said, Vane. She said, I don't know. Yes, you do, he said. She was quiet. She did know. The timing. The same week she'd filed in Dellard, the same week word would have begun moving about a county complaint. The Henderson barn, which was not her barn, but which was the barn of a family that had accepted her help, that had publicly acknowledged where the help came from. A message. Delivered in smoke and burning wood to a county that was watching to see what Mercy Whitaker would do next. He's escalating, Elias said. Yes, she said. That means the complaint scared him. Or made him angry, she said, which is either better or worse than scared, depending on what he does next. Fletcher moved through the dark, steady, and reliable in the way of old horses who had learned that panic was never as useful as it seemed. She kept her hands steady on the reins and her eyes on the road ahead. She thought about Abner Foss building his cellar for 20 years without knowing who would find it. She thought about what he'd written. The difficulty is real, but it is not personal. She thought about whether she believed that, and decided she mostly did, except for the parts of it that were absolutely personal, and she was allowed to acknowledge that. She thought about what it meant that Harold Vane had just destroyed a neighbor's barn because Mercy Whitaker had stopped being afraid of him. She thought about what it meant that she wasn't afraid now either. Not of this. "We're going to need to talk to the Hendersons," she said, "and the Marshes, and the Dietzes, and Bill Hargrove, and anyone else in this county who's been leaning on my fence asking for help this winter." "Why?" Elias asked. "Because Vane just told me exactly what he's afraid of," she said. "He's afraid of what happens when this town stops being afraid of him." She looked at the dark road ahead. "So we're going to show him what that looks like." Elias was quiet for a moment, then, carefully, "That's a bigger thing than a barn." "Yes," she said, "it is." He thought about it. She could feel him thinking about it, the weight of it, the way a man weighs something real against something real. "All right," he said finally. "Then we do that." The farmhouse was lit when they came up the lane. Hargrove must have sent the children home, because there was lamplight in the kitchen window and the faint smell of something cooking. Rose, she thought. Rose and her practical soup. She stopped the wagon and sat for a moment looking at the lit window. 3 months ago, this house had been dark when she came home. It had been dark for 3 years. She had grown so used to the darkness that she'd stopped noticing it was dark. She noticed now. The meeting happened in Mercy's barn. That was Hargrove's suggestion, made the morning after the Henderson fire, when he came to her fence before she'd finished her first cup of coffee. He'd already been to the Henderson place to assess the damage, already been to see Daniel Marsh, already talked to 2 other families along the North Road who had received help from Mercy's stores during the storm weeks. "People will come if you ask them," he said. "The Henderson fire scared people. It was meant to scare people. But scared people sometimes go 2 directions. They go quiet or they go together." He looked at the barn behind her. "Your barn is the biggest enclosed space in reasonable distance right now. Henderson's is gone. The Dietz warehouse has Vane's credit line against it. Martin told me last week, said he's been meaning to clear it but hasn't managed." She looked at him. "Vane has a financial hold on the Dietz warehouse. A small one," Hargrove said. "Enough." She thought about it for exactly the amount of time it required, which was not long. "Saturday," she said. 2 days gives people time to arrange." "I'll spread word," he said. Elias, standing behind her in the doorway, said nothing, but she felt him nod. 11 families came on Saturday. She hadn't expected 11. She'd thought 8, maybe 9. The ones she knew had reason. But word had moved further than Hargrove's rounds, and by the time the barn doors were open and the lanterns lit, there were more people standing in the space that Elias had rebuilt than had been in any room in Callow Creek since the summer social 3 years ago. She recognized every face, and they recognized hers, and the history between her and some of them. The whispers, the comments, the 2 years of people telling her to sell and take the $40. Sat in the room with them, like something they were all choosing to step around for the moment. James Henderson stood near the east wall with his wife and his oldest boy. He was a tall man, made temporarily smaller by what had happened to him, the particular diminishment of a person who has lost something they built. He caught Mercy's eye when she came in and nodded once, with a formality that meant more than formality usually did. She nodded back. She stood in the middle of the barn and waited until the movement settled. She wasn't a woman who had ever enjoyed speaking in front of people, and she didn't enjoy it now, but she had decided on the drive home from Dellard that there were things which needed to be said plainly and in front of witnesses, and she was apparently going to be the one to say them. "I'm not going to talk long," she started. "Most of you know why you're here, and most of you know what happened to the Henderson barn 3 nights ago." She looked around the room. "I filed a complaint with the county land office in Dellard 8 days ago. Deliberate property damage, my fence posts, my well casing, witnesses signed. The complaint is with the circuit judge's schedule for March." She paused. "Harold Vane knew about the filing before the week was out. The Henderson barn burned 4 days after I filed." She let that sit. Martin Dietz said, from the left side of the room, "You're saying Vane burned James's barn." "I'm saying James's barn burned 4 days after I filed a complaint against property damage that has been systematically happening on my farm for 2 years. Mercy said. "I'm saying the timing is what it is. I'm saying what each of you decides to make of that is your own business." An older farmer named Galt, whom she'd known since Tom was alive, said, "Vane's got connections with Pruitt." "I know," she said. "The complaint went to the county, not to Pruitt. The circuit judge isn't Pruitt's concern." "The circuit judge comes in March," Galt said. "That's 6 weeks. Yes, she said. 6 weeks in which Harold Vane knows there's a formal complaint in front of the county and knows that the people in this room are not, individually, as isolated as he has been counting on us being. She watched that land. She watched people look at each other, doing the arithmetic. Hargrove spoke up from near the door. I've been doing some looking into Vane's property dealings in this county, he said. Not just Mercy's land. 3 other parcels in the last 5 years. All of them bought at significantly below value from families who'd had a run of difficulty shortly before selling. The Prentice Place, east of here. The water rights on Garner Creek. The Foley homestead. He paused. All of them sold under pressure. All of them to Vane. The room was very quiet. I want to be clear, Mercy said. I'm not asking anyone to do anything that isn't their own choice. I'm not asking anyone to take a risk they can't afford. I know some of you have notes at the bank that Vane is connected to, and I know that's real. She looked around the room. What I am asking is this. If you know something about your own property, about things you've seen, about dealings that felt wrong, write it down, date it, sign it, give it to Bill Hargrove. She paused. The circuit judge makes decisions based on what's in front of him. Let's give him something to look at. Galt was looking at the floor. Then he looked up. The Prentice Place, he said slowly. Henry Prentice was my neighbor for 20 years. Before he sold to Vane, his north irrigation ditch failed. He always said it didn't fail natural. He stopped. He moved south. I never wrote anything down. Write it now, Mercy said. What you remember, what Henry told you. Galt nodded. 3 other people spoke, one after another, unprompted. Small things individually, a pattern in aggregate, a fence that had failed, a water source that had gone unreliable. A note called in at a bad time by a bank where Vane held interest. She didn't push any of them. She just listened, and Hargrove wrote things in his ledger, and Elias stood against the east wall with his arms crossed and said nothing, which was exactly what the situation needed him to do. James Henderson spoke last. He waited until the others were done, with the patience of a man who'd been sitting with something and waiting for the right moment. I want to say something, he said, about Mercy Whitaker. She looked at him. This woman sent supplies to my family during the storm, he said. She did it without being asked and without making us feel like charity cases, which is a harder thing to do than most people manage. He looked around the room. I've been in this county for 15 years, and I have not always been as decent to her as I should have been. I'm saying that now in front of people, because I think it matters to say it in front of people when you've been wrong in front of people. The room was still. Her barn is standing because of the work of a man who walked 60 miles to find a place where he could offer something instead of just asking, James continued, and I think that's the kind of thing we should be paying attention to, as a community, instead of watching to see if she'd make a mistake. He sat down. His wife put her hand on his arm. Mercy looked at the floor for a moment because she needed to, and then she looked up. Thank you, she said. And then, because she was not a woman who let sentiment replace action for long. The other thing I want to say is about the Henderson family. They lost their barn. That's a significant loss going into planting season. She looked around the room. Elias Rowan is the best barn builder I've seen work. When the weather breaks enough for foundation work, I'd like to propose a raising. Labor contributed by whoever can give it materials. I'll cover the timber if Bill Hargrove will run me the credit. Hargrove said, from the door, I'll run you the credit. Then that's settled, she said. Anyone who can give a day of labor, talk to Elias before you leave tonight. That was how the meeting ended. Not with a dramatic resolution, but with practical arrangements, which is how most things that actually matter end. People clustered in groups talking, and Elias stood near the door with Caleb beside him, taking down names on a piece of paper, and Rose moved through the barn with the tray of biscuits she'd made that afternoon with the quiet purposefulness of a child who had decided that feeding people was a form of participation. Clara Dietz found Mercy near the back of the barn and stood beside her and looked out at the room. You've changed, Clara said, not unkindly. I don't think I have, Mercy said. You have, Clara said. You were always steady, but this is different. This is... She seemed to search for it. Like you stopped waiting for permission. Mercy thought about that. She thought about the morning Vane had dropped his paper at her feet and she had picked it up without reading it. She thought about the gate she had opened without knowing who Elias Rowan was or what opening it would cost. She thought about the moment on the barn roof in the middle of the storm, the cold and the wind and the choice to go up anyway. Maybe, she said. The circuit judge arrived in Callow Creek on the 17th of March, 3 days ahead of schedule, which was his habit. He came early to look at things before people had arranged themselves for his arrival. His name was Aldous Crane, and he was a compact man in his 60s with a gray beard kept short and eyes that moved around a room like a man reading a ledger, taking inventory without appearing to. He arrived on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, he had read the complaint from Mercy's filing and the supplemental statements, 15 of them now, from 12 different people, that Hargrove had compiled and sent to Dellard 2 weeks prior. By Wednesday afternoon, he had ridden out to look at the fence line himself, with Hargrove and Elias and Mercy present, and he'd crouched at each post the way Elias had crouched and pressed his thumb into the disturbed earth and said nothing for a long time. He looked at the well casing. He looked at it for 5 full minutes without speaking. Then he looked at Mercy. "How long has this been going on?" that he asked. "Vane's been making offers for 2 years, she said. "The physical damage, I believe, started last spring. The fence post before first freeze in October. And the Henderson barn fire. I cannot prove that," she said carefully. "I can prove the timing." Judge Crane looked at the well casing again. "The tool marks on this casing are consistent with someone trying to crack the stone using a pointed bar," he said. "I've seen similar damage before. It's not subtle, if you know what you're looking at." He straightened up. "I know what I'm looking at." Harold Vane was summoned to appear before the circuit court 3 days later in the meeting hall above the dry goods store that served as Callow Creek's courtroom when the judge was in residence. He came with a lawyer from the county seat, a man named Ferris who had a good coat and the manner of someone accustomed to making things disappear with the right paperwork. Mercy sat at the complainant's table with Hargrove beside her and Elias in the row directly behind. She had worn her good dress, which she hadn't worn since Tom's funeral, and it was slightly too large in the shoulders now, 3 years of physical work having changed her in ways she hadn't entirely tracked. She'd taken it in at the waist herself, the night before, by lamplight, with Rose sitting across from her doing her own mending and occasionally making suggestions about the stitching that were more accurate than a 7-year-old had any right to be. Vane came in with Ferris and sat at the opposite table and did not look at Mercy. He looked at the judge, at Ferris, at the windows. How is a man who had spent 20 years being the most consequential person in most rooms he entered, and the effort of not looking at her was visible? She found that interesting. Ferris made his opening case with professional smoothness. Property damage was unproven, coincidence was not evidence. The complainant had a history of financial distress that made her claims about property values unreliable. The supplemental statements were neighborhood gossip elevated to document form. He was good at it. She could see why Vane hired him. Judge Crane listened to all of it without expression. Then he looked at the stack of statements, 15 of them, 12 different signatories. "Mr. Ferris," he said, "I have statements here from 12 residents of this county, each describing a pattern of property difficulty preceding a transaction that benefited your client. I have physical evidence of deliberate damage to fence posts and a well casing on the complainant's property. I have a record of your client making below-market acquisition offers to Mrs. Whitaker immediately following each incident of property difficulty." He paused. "I am not going to call this neighborhood gossip." Ferris adjusted his approach without losing composure, which was the sign of a practiced lawyer. He moved to arguing specifics. The evidence for who exactly had damaged the posts was circumstantial. There was no direct witness to any act of deliberate damage. The well casing marks could have multiple explanations. Crane heard him out. Then he looked at Vane directly for the first time. "Mr. Vane," he said, "do you have anything to say to this court?" Vane looked at Ferris. Ferris gave a small, almost invisible nod. "I've been trying to help Mrs. Whitaker," Vane said. He had a voice built for reassurance, and he used it now. "She's been struggling since her husband passed. The offers I've made have been fair, more than fair, given the condition of the property." "The condition of the property," Crane said, "which your offers followed each time the property's condition worsened." "The property has been declining," Vane said. "I don't control the weather or a widow's ability to manage a farm alone." Mercy felt Hargrove tense beside her. She put her hand flat on the table and kept her face still. "No," Crane said, "you don't control the weather." He looked at the complaint document. "But the fence posts don't come loose in the pattern described by natural settling, Mr. Vane. And the well casing marks were made by a tool, not by frost or age." He set the document down. "I'm going to be direct. I cannot prove, on the evidence before me today, that you personally performed these acts. What I can establish is a documented pattern of property interference coinciding precisely with your acquisition offers across multiple properties in this county over 5 years." He folded his hands. I am issuing a formal county finding of suspicious property interference against the Whitaker claim. This finding will be attached to every property record you hold in this county, Mr. Vane, and to every transaction you attempt to make in this county for the next 10 years. Any future property damage in proximity to your business interests will be investigated as criminal, not civil, matter. He paused. Additionally, you will pay restitution to Mrs. Whitaker for the documented damage to her fence post and well casing. The amount will be assessed by this court and is not negotiable. Ferris started to speak. I'm not finished, Crane said, without raising his voice. The Henderson barn fire is an open investigation. I am forwarding the evidence and timeline to the state marshal's office, which will conduct its own inquiry independent of local law enforcement. He looked at Vane with the flat, unhurried expression of a man who had been doing this for a long time, and had learned that most things revealed themselves if you waited long enough. I'd suggest, Mr. Vane, that you consult with Mr. Ferris carefully about your next steps. The county is watching the situation closely now. It was not a dramatic conclusion. There was no confession, no sudden collapse of Vane's position, no moment of perfect justice delivered cleanly. The law rarely worked that way, and Mercy had not expected it to. What it was real. A formal finding, a financial consequence, a flag on every future move Vane tried to make in the county. A door closing on the easy path he had been walking for 5 years. She walked out of the meeting hall into the March air, which was cold but carried something different from winter cold. A loosening at the edges, the faint suggestion that the ground underneath was thinking about change. Hargrove shook her hand. He'd never shaken her hand before, and the formality of it made her almost smile. That's not everything, he said, but it's something. It's enough for now, she said. Elias was beside her. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stood in the weak March sun with his hands in his coat pockets. The marshal's investigation, he said. For the Henderson fire. Yes, she said. That could actually get somewhere. It could, she said. That's why Crane sent it to the state. He knows Pruitt's limitations. Elias nodded slowly. She could see him processing it. The way he processed construction problems, not rushing, not wishful, just methodical. Vane came out of the building behind them with Ferris, and for one moment he and Mercy were in the same line of sight on the same street, and he looked at her. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything, but she held his gaze long enough for him to look away first, and he did. And then he and Ferris walked to their horses and rode out of town. She watched him go. She thought about the morning he'd dropped his paper in her dead field and told her Tom had left her a losing hand. She thought about every version of that message she'd been receiving for 3 years. From Vane, from well-meaning neighbors, from her own worst 3 in the morning moments. The version that said this land was not worth fighting for, that she was not capable of winning, that a sensible woman would have taken $40 and accepted the shape of her own diminishment. She thought about what it had actually taken. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a single decisive moment, but a winter of small decisions. Opening a gate, keeping a man's confidence about a cut timber, sitting up late reading an old farmer's journal, going up on a barn roof in the middle of a storm, making soup and splitting wood and writing things down and asking people to sign their names to what they'd seen. The accumulation of small honest, that was the whole of it. Spring came the way it always did in that valley. Tentative at first, then insistent. The ground softened from the bottom up, which is how ground thaws, and the south field showed itself again under the retreating snow, brown and resting and ready. The seed planting happened on a Saturday in early April, and it was not a small or private thing. Elias had built a simple planting rig from salvage timber that allowed 2 people to work a row together, and Mercy walked the first row herself, alone, because she needed to. She pressed the first seeds into the soil with her own hands. The Foss wheat tested in February 2/3 of the jars viable, more than she dared hope, and felt the cold earth around her fingers and thought about Abner Foss pressing seeds into the same ground in 1832, not knowing if it would come to anything. You do the work without knowing. That was the whole message of his cellar, she'd come to understand. Not the supplies. The supplies were practical, and practical things mattered. But the act of building it, the 20-year patience of it, the decision to prepare for a future populated by people he'd never meet. That was the thing. You prepare for the people who will come after you. You do it without knowing who they are. And sometimes they find what you left, and sometimes they don't, and either way, you built it to last. The Henderson barn raising happened on the last Saturday in April. Elias had spent 3 weeks on the foundation and framing preparation, working with Caleb beside him most days, and the Saturday itself brought out 23 people. More than had come to the meeting in February, and this time with a different quality of gatheredness, the kind that comes from people who have decided something and are acting on it. James Henderson set the first post. Elias guided it, but Henderson's hands were on the wood, which was right. He'd lost the barn. He should be the one to start the new one. His oldest son worked beside him, and Caleb worked beside the son. And at some point in the mid-morning, Mercy looked over and saw the three boys working a rope together with the focus of people who are too busy to perform anything, and she felt something so simple and clear that she didn't try to name it. By late afternoon, the frame was up. She stood and looked at it. The bones of a building, open to the sky, the evening light coming through the raw wood with that particular amber quality that late April carries. Elias came and stood beside her, and they looked at it together, both of them tired in the good way. "You're a good teacher," she said. "Caleb's getting genuinely capable." "He's got the instinct for it," Elias said. "He reads the wood the way good builders do. He feels when something's not right before he can say why." "He gets that from somewhere," she said. Elias looked at her with the quiet that meant he understood what she was saying and was choosing not to deflect from it. "I want to talk to you about something," he said. "Tonight, when the children are in bed." She looked at him. "All right." That evening, after the Hendersons and the Hargroves and the Dietzes had gone home and the children were asleep, they sat at the kitchen table the way they'd sat at it through the whole winter, the lamp between them, the house quiet around them, the particular ease of two people who have run out of reasons to be guarded with each other. Elias had something in his coat pocket. He set it on the table. It was a folded piece of paper. She looked at it, then at him. "I wrote to Clara's family," he said. "Her parents in Ohio told them where the children were, that they were safe and well. They wrote back." He touched the paper. "They want to come visit in the summer, see the children, see where we are." "That's good," she said. "The children should know their mother's family." "Yes," he said, "and I want them to know, when they come, that this is a permanent place." He looked at her directly, "That the children have a home here, that I'm not a man who's between things." He paused. "I want them to know what this is." She held his gaze. "What is this?" she asked, not to make him struggle, because she wanted to hear him say it. "It's a life," he said. "If you'll have it, if you'll have us." He stopped and made a small, frustrated gesture with his hand. I had more words for this. They seemed better before I was actually sitting here saying them." She almost smiled. "You're doing fine. Clara's parents are going to ask me," he said, "what my intentions are, what kind of man I am, and I want to be able to tell them, not just that I have work and I'm keeping the children fed, but that I've found," he stopped again, "that this is it, that this is where I'm meant to be." He looked at his hands on the table. "I know that's not a small thing to ask. I know you had a life with Tom, and I don't think I could be what Tom was to you, and I'm not trying to be." "No," she said, "you're not Tom." She let that sit, because it was true and deserved to be true. "Tom was a good man who loved me and protected me from hard things when I needed the full truth, and I grieved him for 3 years, and some mornings I still do." She looked at the lamp. "You're a different kind of man. You tell me what's wrong with my property. You make mistakes and say so. You cut a timber short and tell me about it before I even knew." She looked at him. "Those are not small things to me." I was watching her. "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Yes, to which part?" "To the life," she said. "To having you, to all of it." He let out a breath that had clearly been in him for a while. Something in his face changed, not dramatically, because he was not a dramatic man, but genuinely, the way a person's face changes when they've been holding something taut for a long time and they can finally put it down. "I'm not always easy to live with," he said. "I think things too long. I get quiet when I should talk." "I know," she said. "You're also honest and careful, and you went up on a barn roof in the middle of a storm without complaining about it." She paused. "I'm not always easy either. I make decisions and don't explain them until after." "I've noticed," he said, with something that was almost dry. "So we're agreed," she said. "We're both imperfect, and we're going to do this anyway." "Yes," he said. "I think that's exactly it." He reached across the table and took her hand. Not dramatically. Just took it, the way you take hold of something you've decided to keep. His hands were rough from the winter's work, and so were hers, and neither of them noticed because it was just how hands were. They sat like that for a while, the lamp burning between them, the house breathing around them, the south field outside in the dark with Abner Foss's wheat seeds pressed into the soil, waiting for what came next. The spring and summer that followed were not perfect. Nothing was. The state marshal's investigation into the Henderson fire took 4 months and produced enough evidence to charge one of Vane's hired men with arson, and the hired man presented with the charge named Vane as the one who'd ordered it. Vane denied it. There was a trial in the county seat in August. It did not produce a clean verdict. The hired man's testimony was ruled insufficient on its own without corroboration, and Vane's lawyer Ferris earned whatever he was being paid. But Vane did not escape entirely. The county findings stood. The attached record stood. And two of Vane's business creditors, reading the trial coverage in the county paper, quietly called in notes he'd been carrying. Harold Vane left Callow Creek in September. He sold two of his parcels, the Prentice Place and the Foley Homestead, at fair market value, a thing he had never done in his life because he had never had to. He went east to the city, where he likely found other angles to work. But he left, and the land he left behind went to people who worked it. Elias and Mercy were married in June, in the farmyard, with the barn standing solid behind them and the south field showing green. It was not an elaborate occasion. Hargrove came, and the Hendersons and the Dietzes and Judge Crane, who happened to be in the county that week and whom Hargrove had apparently informed with the particular casualness that meant it was not casual at all. Caleb, who at 10 had already decided how he felt about everything and simply needed the arrangements to catch up, shook Elias's hand with a seriousness that made three adults look at different parts of the yard for a moment. Rose, who was 7 and had her own ideas about most things, presented Mercy with a bouquet of wildflowers she'd collected from the field that morning. Irregular, slightly wilted at the edges, held together with a piece of string, and said, "I picked the ones that were already open. The closed ones should stay on the plant." "That's exactly right," Mercy said, and meant it in more ways than the flowers. Clara's parents came from Ohio in July. Older people, tired from the journey, careful in the way of people who have lost a daughter and are trying to understand the shape of the world without her. Her father was a quiet man who spent the first day watching Elias and the children and not saying much. Her mother, whose name was Ruth, sat in Mercy's kitchen the second morning and asked Mercy direct questions about the farm and the winter and what the children's days were like, and Mercy answered them as honestly as she knew how. At the end of the second day, Clara's father came and found Elias in the barn, the completed barn, the west section finally finished in May, the whole structure solid and tight and carrying its load without complaint. He stood in the doorway and looked at it for a while. "You built this?" he asked. "Most of it," Elias said. Mercy and Caleb put in their share. Clara's father looked at the east wall, the new posts, the precise joinery. Then he looked at Elias. "My daughter would have liked this woman," he said. "She had a sense for people." He paused. "I think she would have liked this." Elias looked at the barn floor, the plank over the trapdoor, the hidden cellar below. He thought about Abner Foss, who built things for people he'd never meet. "I think so too," he said. The wheat came up strong in July. Not perfectly. There were 2 rows along the north edge where the soil needed amendment and the yield was thin, and she noted it in her own journal, the one she'd started keeping after reading Foss's, because she understood now the value of writing things down for whoever came after. But the bulk of the south field came up clean and good, the cold, hardy strains Foss had selected proving out exactly as he'd anticipated. And when she stood in the field in late July and looked at the green-going gold of it, she was aware that she was standing in something that ran deeper than one growing season. She was standing in the result of small decisions made honestly. By Foss, who built a cellar in the 1840s. By her, who opened a gate in November. By Elias, who walked 60 miles to offer what he had instead of simply asking for what he needed. By Caleb, who showed up every morning without being asked. By Rose, who made soup with what was available and offered it without ceremony. None of them had known how it would turn out. That was the thing she kept returning to, the thing that felt like the actual truth underneath all the other truths. You couldn't see far enough ahead to know whether what you were building would matter. You built it anyway. You made the decision in front of you with whatever you had, and you tried to make it honestly, and the accumulation of those decisions became, over time, something you could stand in and look around at. It was not glamorous. The farm was still work, unending and seasonal and physical in a way that wore on the body. She was 44 years old, and her knees knew it, and her hands knew it. Elias was 41, and he'd started making a small sound when he stood up from crouching that he didn't comment on, which she found both concerning and endearing. The children were growing in the uneven way of children. Caleb had shot up 2 inches over the winter and was now almost at her shoulder. Rose had lost 2 teeth in the spring and taken it personally. Nothing was smooth. Nothing had resolved into ease. But there was a difference between difficulty that was wearing you down and difficulty that was just the normal weight of a life with things in it worth carrying, and she had learned, over that year, to tell the difference. One evening in late August, she found Caleb in the barn, sitting on the floor of the hayloft with one of Foss's almanacs open on his knees. He'd been reading through the old book steadily over the summer. He had an appetite for practical information that was almost comical in its intensity, this 10-year-old cross-referencing planting schedules against weather patterns. "What are you working out?" she asked, climbing the loft ladder. He looked up. He had Elias's eyes, but Clara's something else, some quality of expression she'd never been able to name but recognized every time she saw it. "The back 40, he said. He turned the almanac toward her and showed her a margin note in Foss's handwriting. A note about the soil composition in the east pasture, the drainage patterns, what it would support. Foss thought this ground could run cattle, Caleb said, with the right water management. He wrote about it 3 different times. He looked at her with the focused seriousness he brought to things he cared about. "I've been looking at the creek access on the east boundary. If we diverted a channel..." "Caleb," she said, "you're 10. "Almost 11, he said, "and I'm not saying do it now. I'm saying it's worth knowing." He looked at the almanac. "Foss built the cellar 20 years before anyone needed it. I figure knowing about the back 40 now puts us ahead." She looked at him for a moment. "You're right," she said. "It does." He nodded with the satisfaction of a boy who has been taken seriously, which is the thing boys that age want most and get least. She sat beside him in the hayloft, and they looked at the almanac together, Foss's handwriting faint but legible, the observations of a man who had loved this land enough to study it for 20 years. Outside, she could hear Rose calling something to Elias from the yard, and his answer, and the sound of the farm in the last light of August, the chickens settling, Fletcher moving in his stall, the summer crickets beginning their long conversation. She thought about what she would write in her own journal that evening, not the dramatic things. The court hearing, the marriage, the spring planting. The dramatic things wrote themselves. She would write about Caleb in the hayloft with an old man's almanac working out the back 40. She would write about Rose and her soup and her practical flowers. She would write about a man who told her when he cut a timber short and what that simple honesty had meant over a winter of needing to trust someone. She would write it for whoever came after, because that was what you did if you'd been given the gift of someone else's foresight. You paid it forward into a future you couldn't see, and you trusted that the work was worth doing even without knowing the result. Abner Foss had not known her name. He had not known Tom's name, or Elias's, or the names of 2 children from 60 miles east who would eat soup in his old kitchen and sleep in his old house and grow up on the ground he had first broken in 1832. He had not known any of it. He had only known that the future was worth preparing for, and that resources were meant to help the living, and that things built to last had a way of finding the people who needed them. He was right about all of it. She closed the almanac gently and handed it back to Caleb. "Show me the creek access map you're thinking about," she said. His face opened up entirely. That particular brightness of a child whose idea has been invited in. "I drew it out," he said, already reaching into his shirt pocket for a folded piece of paper. "It's rough, but..." "Show me," she said. And he did, and the farm held them, solid and imperfect and theirs, while the summer evening moved around them toward dark, and in the house across the yard, a lamp came on in the kitchen window. Rose, lighting it without being asked, the way she did every evening now, so that when the others came in from the outside work, they would come into light instead of darkness. It was a small thing. It was also everything.